Most of you have taken more standardized tests than you can remember, and most of you have probably done badly on some of those tests and don't like them at all. Many of you also probably wonder why you still take them. When many teachers, parents, and students dislike these tests, why are they still used? Why do they determine how knowledgeable you are? And why are some of these tests required to apply to certain schools and colleges? The simplest answer is because it is the law. No, the law doesn't specifically say that we must take an overwhelming amount of standardized tests, but the No Child Left Behind Act requires all students to follow standards and to take NCLB tests, standardized tests. NCLB is drowning students in mandated standardized tests. SATs, ACTs, PSATs, AP tests, midterms, finals, benchmarks, and mandatory statewide tests, including SOLs, are all standardized tests. By the end of high school, most students have taken almost all of these tests more than once. Standardized tests really aren't a good way to view a person's understanding of a topic for multiple reasons. One being the tests aren't fair to everyone. Secondly, most people involved in the school system are against this way of teaching and learning. And lastly, they aren't necessary in the education system. Teachers have also quit their jobs, saying that ever since the No Child Left Behind bill got passed, all they were required to do was get students ready for tests. Rather than closing achievement gaps and providing equal opportunities for all students, the focus was shifted from student learning towards testing, labeling, and punishing schools. Stacey Starr, who was named as top teacher by a popular national television show, Live with Kelly and Michael, announced that she was quitting because teachers are required to spend too much time teaching kids to take and pass tests. Stacey said,
"It is very upsetting. We are becoming presenters of materials and not teachers. They have taken away all of our creativity in the classroom."
Another issue with this way of learning is that it discourages creativity by forcing you to memorize words and facts for the standardized test. Creativity is being locked up in a cage, while standardized tests take over our education system. Leslie O., a teacher in Virginia, said,
NCLB is not a successful legislation. Educators have been trained to create meaningful assignments, which should include strong emphasis on applying what a student knows to meaningful project-based assignments. Stop the madness of NCLB and the ridiculous amounts of standardized testing associated with it.
She also said that,
ultimately, kids that do not perform well on standardized tests come from low-income homes or live in poverty. If a student is hungry or is not receiving proper sleep or medical care, or has no computer at home, or has to work outside of school to help keep a roof over their family's heads, their grades are going to suffer.
Nowadays, standardized tests are ruining school systems and are also becoming less necessary for a student to have a successful education. NCLB tests are drastically narrowing the curriculum. Other countries, especially those that have better educational rankings than the USA, use little to no standardized tests. But the United States administers almost 40 times the amount of tests as those countries. A national 2007 study by the Center of Education Policy reported that since 2001, 44% of school districts had reduced the time spent on science, social studies, and the arts by an average of 145 minutes per week in order to focus on reading and math. An Education Week survey in 2000 showed that 66% of teachers thought the states were forcing them to concentrate too much on what was tested, which meant other important subject matter was not covered. A new Council of the Great City Schools study found that a typical student takes 112 mandated standardized tests between pre-kindergarten classes and 12th grade, but most countries that outperform the United States on international exams test students 3 times during their school careers. Also, according to Stanford University researchers Linda Darling-Hammond and Laura McCloskey, Finland topped the international education rankings from 2001 to 2008, yet has no external standardized tests used to rank students or schools. Clearly, standardized tests are not needed for a student to receive a good education. This is a video made by Chris Tinkin, author of the book The School Reform Landscape: Fraud, Myth, and Lies.
Did you know that because of the new standardized testing programs related to the Common Core state standards, that public school students will spend more time each year being tested and less time actually learning? For example, elementary school students will spend more time taking state standardized tests this year than a law school student spends taking the bar exam, and more time than the exams required to become a police officer, teacher, or school superintendent. Now, some people say we need all this testing to increase student learning and hold teachers accountable. But what do these tests really tell us about learning and quality teaching? Actually, not much. For tests to provide diagnostic information about student learning, there must be at least 20 to 25 questions for each skill in each standard being tested. None of these new tests have that many questions. To be useful for instruction, teachers and parents need the results returned quickly, and they need to be able to see the actual questions students got right and wrong. The results from these tests are not formative. They're summative, used to monitor, not educate. Also, the results won't be returned until after students finish the school year. Parents, teachers, and children will never be able to see all the questions from the tests. It's kind of like going for an annual checkup at your doctor, waiting 5 months for the results, and not being able to know which test the doctor ran on you. Standardized tests do not provide the in-depth information about teaching and learning that educators, parents, and children deserve. Worst of all, colleagues and I have been able to predict the test results using only U.S. Census data from your community. Using the results from commercially prepared standardized tests to make important decisions about educators and children is education malpractice. School and classroom-based assessments are more accurate. For example, grades and high school grade point average generally predicts college readiness and persistence through college more accurately than the SAT. Report cards and grade point average measure years of work. Standardized test measures one day. All the emphasis being put on the results and preparing for these tests is killing creativity in our public schools. Teachers are forced to focus on teaching to the test for fear of their job security. Kids are being denied full access to subjects that foster creativity, socially conscious problem solving, resilience, networking, and other skills necessary to compete in a 21st century economy. Testing is not teaching. Test preparation is not learning. Teachers are the ultimate instruction and assessment professionals. Their expertise can't be replaced by a score on a standardized test. Let's move away from standardized testing and toward authentic teaching. End the myopic focus on knowledge imitation and regurgitation aimed at finding one correct answer, and expand into creation and innovation with problem-based curricula and high-quality, open-ended classroom assessment. Let teachers teach. Let children learn.
Students tend to do better when they aren't doing test-based learning. Also, certain classes are being focused on more than others, which encourages students to believe that the subjects that require less time are less important than those that are being focused on. But that is not the case. Currently, there have been discussions on how to amend the No Child Left Behind law to reduce the amount of standardized testing going on across the country. If an amendment isn't made soon, then the amount of standardized testing that occurs will just increase to a point where teachers may no longer be required. It is important that we understand that a piece of paper cannot determine how knowledgeable someone is. It cannot tell you how smart someone is and how well they know a subject. One score should not determine what schools or colleges a student gets into. There are many things standardized tests cannot tell you. One standardized test score cannot measure creativity, critical thinking, resilience, motivation, persistence, curiosity, endurance, reliability, enthusiasm, empathy, self-awareness, self-discipline, leadership, courage, compassion, resourcefulness, sense of beauty, sense of wonder, honesty, integrity, and so much more. Right now, one test score can change someone's life, and most of the time not in a good way. Standardized tests are playing a role in the education system that shouldn't even exist. These tests are unfair to students in different ways, one being a student's native intellectual ability. To support this, James W. Puffin states that some children from birth will find it easier to mess around with mathematics than will others. Some kids from birth will have an easier time with verbal matters than will others. Another factor that makes these tests unfair is out-of-school learning. Puffin says the most troubling items on standardized achievement tests assess what students have learned outside of school. Unfortunately, you'll find more of these items on standardized achievement tests than you'd expect. If children come from advantaged families and stimulus-rich environments, then they are more apt to succeed on specific items in standardized achievement tests than will other children whose environments don't mesh as well with what the tests measure. One more disturbing factor that makes these tests unfair is that certain test questions can favor particular socioeconomic statuses. Botham strongly says that one of the chief reasons that children's socioeconomic status is so highly correlated with standardized test scores is that many items on standardized achievement tests really focus on assessing knowledge and skills learned outside of school. Knowledge and skills more likely to be learned in some socioeconomic settings than in others. Currently, standardized tests are not liked by teachers who administer the test and students who are required to take them. They are also not necessary for someone to have a successful education, which can be supported by the fact that Finland has no standardized tests but has managed to top the international education rankings for many years, whereas the USA administers many standardized tests but has not been able to top these rankings. Also, they are unfair to people who don't get out of school learning, have different native intellectual abilities, and are of lower socioeconomic status. One may argue that standardized testing has improved student achievement since 100 years ago. Although that may be true, after No Child Left Behind was passed in 2002, the U.S. went from 18th in the world in math to the 31st place by 2009. Similar changes occurred in science. There is no evidence that test-based learning is working. So what role should standardized testing play in our education system? It is currently used to determine how knowledgeable people are, to compare students to others, and to apply for schools and colleges. I believe that standardized testing should be used minimally, unlike right now. I agree that they do teach students important test-taking skills and strategies, so the number of standardized tests taken during someone's elementary to high school career should be reduced to 3 or 4 instead of 112. If they are to be used, though, they need to be fixed in a way that they are fair to all and not just to upper-class rich folks. I believe that standardized tests should be used for students to compare themselves to their previous selves, meaning that their current standardized test scores should be compared to their previous test scores to view improvement or declination in specific subjects. This would allow the student to know that they need to focus on a specific subject, or maybe that they have gotten better in a subject, or maybe even that they should be in a higher level for some subject. Teaching to the test is what our education system has turned to because of the overwhelming amount of mandated standardized tests that students are required to take, and teachers are required to administer. This way of teaching often does not help a student remember important information, but rather requires them to memorize facts which will not remain in the student's head after a few years, and maybe even after the day ends. No more unnecessary standardized tests.